Hublot sucks. Jaeger le-coultre is a price ripoff and AP is a one-trick pony. Bashing brands is actually really easy, but is it always justified? I decided to take some time out and discuss if you could actually defend those brands that we so easily bash. Is there a silver lining behind the cloud of JLC's high prices, Hublot's brash style, and Panerai lackluster attention to detail? Well, I'm going to take a look at these bashed brands from a different angle, give it all some perspective, and also challenge my own biases with some counter arguments. I think most enthusiasts would agree that Hublot is most suitable for footballers, people with no style, and people with the whitest of white veneers. The criticism of Hublot usually boils down to three components. Way too high prices for subpar products. Brash celebrity-based marketing not focused on craft, but just flash and ostentatiousness. And ugly watches. Let's start with pricing. I'm going to ignore piece uniques simply because no piece unique is priced by any meaningful logic. Those are watches that are priced as so expensive that only people that have throwaway money would buy them anyway, and it being expensive is kind of the whole point. That applies to Patek, to Hublot, to Jaeger, and it applies to some extent to Breguet. Ultra high-end pricing has nothing to do with quality, well, not always, and let's not pretend that there's a strong correlation. But a big bang. $20,000 for a titanium chronograph on a leather strap. A steel Daytona is $16,000, $17,000. A titanium IWC Sport Performance chrono is about $14,000. A JLC Polaris chrono in steel is around $17,000. Initially, $20,000 seems expensive, but titanium usually tacks on about 15 to 20% to the retail price. So assuming a Polaris is $17K in steel, a JLC Polaris could easily cost $20K in titanium. A Blancpain Bathyscaphe flyback chrono is $22,000. A Breguet Type 20 in steel is priced at just around $21,000. So it's priced like a titanium JLC or on par with an entry-level Breguet or Blancpain chrono. It's much cheaper than an AP, a Patek, or a Vacheron, and it's more expensive than a JLC or a Seiko. The movement inside is not an off-the-shelf movement. It's not a custom rotor job. It is a self-developed flyback chronograph. It's got 70 or so hours of power reserve. It's 13-ish millimeters in thickness, which puts it a little bit thicker than a Daytona, but thinner than quite a few Omega chronos. So let's pause on the Hublot Big Bang chrono, and I will throw the Classic Fusion into the mix. Base Classic Fusion in titanium is around $10,000 for a 42mm watch with a reworked Sellita SW330 movement. Here, things look completely different. IWC will offer you something similar in steel for $6,000 with a significantly better movement. Titanium watches with Sellita SW3X movements can be found for less than $4,000. I think two examples are good enough. And what you're going to end up concluding is this. For the absolute entry-level Hublots, let's call them starter Hublots, the price to spec ratio is completely out of sync with anything you can get from any other brand. But once you get to their own in-house developed movements, pricing starts to be relatively similar to competition like Blancpain, JLC, and Breguet. Is it expensive? Absolutely. Does Hublot, because of their relatively short heritage, have the same old world watchmaking clout as Blancpain or JLC? No. But on a spec for spec and finishing for finishing level, they are more or less in the ballpark of those kinds of brands. They do emphasize different things though. In my world, a watch is made up of 5 components. The core manufacturing of the externals, case and bracelet, the manufacturing of the internals, so the movement typically, the creativity and the design that goes into coming up with the watches and the movements, the craft or level of handmaidedness that goes into finishing these watches, and finally, brand identity. Those 5 things define how you get to price a watch. Is Hublot, in terms of case, bracelet, and dial, every bit on the level of something like a comparably priced JLC? I would say yes. Movement? Again, ignoring the craft piece, yes. Is there a team at Hublot actually spending time on designing something unique, just like there is at Blancpain or JLC? Absolutely. Hublot lean more into special materials, sapphire, ceramic, and that kind of stuff, but they do actually have technical capability. JLC might prioritize a more delicate aesthetic, but Hublot's capability is no less technically relevant. That means you're basically down to two things: craft, so the handmadeness piece, and identity. Are you going to get more artistic handmade flourish from JLC, Glashütte, or Blancpain? I would definitely say yes, but it's not worlds apart. You're not going to see a lot of Hublots with hand-engraved swan neck regulators, but that's also because it's not the Hublot aesthetic. What Hublot does throw money at is those materials, at least in the higher end, and that's what's driving their cost. But in the pure old world watchmaking craft, this isn't where Hublot emphasizes their focus or puts their money. Which brings me to identity. Hublot has for the longest time prioritized crafting their identity and their brand. It's above all else what Jean-Claude Biver was good at, and that allowed them to charge a high price for a brand that hadn't been around for 200 years and for a brand that doesn't sell itself on old men in lab coats in barns milking cows and black polishing screws with a monocle up against one eye. So what's the conclusion of this little rant? For their entry-level products, they are highly overpriced and out of sync with what others offer. For their core lineup, they are priced comparably to other highly priced brands, and they compete with customers with a similar amount of cash. They prioritize a very different aesthetic, but they are no less technically competent from that core point and up. They are heavy on branding, and a branding that isn't old school watch nerd friendly. So my verdict is, apart from their horrendous starting watches, if you like them, they're competitive. They're just very, very different. I also try to be a little bit different from other YouTube channels. If you are enjoying my approach and are new here, and I know half of you are, then support the channel by clicking the subscribe button. Thanks a ton. JLC is all about horrendous price increases. That's the key criticism. So let's unpack that. 17,000 for a steel chronograph Polaris. That's basically the same as a Daytona. 7,000 more than a Speedmaster. A steel Master Ultra Thin, 10,600 euros, $11,000. That's a whole lot more than an Aquaterra or an Oyster Perpetual. But a Blancpain Villeray Ultra Plate is $13,000. A Vacheron Constantin 56 in steel is $15,000. What you're seeing here is something interesting at play. There aren't a lot of brands that are priced like JLC. They are cheaper, much cheaper than any Trinity or Trinity adjacent brand in steel, and they are vastly more expensive than upper mid brands like IWC, Glashütte, or Breitling. They go kind of toe to toe with Blancpain on a lot of models, and then they have some high complications that they price astronomically high. I also think you have to separate the pricing conversation into two distinct parts. One is the absolute pricing, and the other is the relative pricing. In absolute terms, $10,000 for a steel three-handed wristwatch is a lot of money and a lot more than they charged 4-5 years ago, even when you factor in the massive inflation in those years. But relatively, priced like Blancpain, more than Omega, more than Rolex, but cheaper than Patek and Vacheron, I would say that intuitively that makes sense to me. I personally would not put JLC on par with Vacheron Constantin. I know others would, but I personally wouldn't. I don't believe they have the cachet for it. I don't believe they have the identity, back to those 5 components, that can justify them being put on par with Vacheron. But I do think that when they make a watch like the Polaris Chrono or the Reverso Chrono, do they there make a watch that is technically and artistically and craft-wise incredibly impressive? Absolutely. So I don't believe in letting brands off the hook. JLC did raise prices more than they should have, and I'm convinced that it was a bad bet for them. But considering what they do on the complication side of things, are you still, relatively speaking, getting a lot for your money? Yes, you are. If you're one of the people that believes JLC are on par with the Trinity brands, well, then they're an absolute bargain. If you believe you're getting more craft than Rolex or Omega, then 10,000, which incidentally is the price for a 3-hander observatory from Omega these days, isn't completely insane. And I don't believe, like some YouTuber said some years back, that you should shut up if you just can't afford it. I do believe it should be called out, but there is a case to be made for that positioning. Verdict, priced like Blancpain? Sounds about right. Also, the pricing of the new integrated watch that they have is still high, but more humble than we've been used to from JLC. With Tag Heuer, we're not going to talk about pricing. We can always talk about pricing. What we're going to cover is how Tag destroyed Heuer after the takeover in the mid-1980s. According to the haters, the brand was turned into a lifestyle brand with crappy quality, quartz movements, and terrible value compared to any real competitor. The simple fact that they have the Tag Heuer connected watches is typically enough to give most purists heart palpitations. But let's take 3 watches. The Tag Heuer Aqua Racer Professional 300 date. This is a $5,400 dive watch with 300 meters of water resistance, a steel case and bracelet, ceramic bezel, fully adjustable quick adjustment clasp, COSC certified AMT division co-designed movement with 80 hours of power reserve, and a dial with applied markers and the whole shebang. Second watch, Tag Heuer Carrera Glassbox Chrono, $9,400, about the same as an Omega Speedmaster. Fully in-house developed chronograph movement with 80 hours of power reserve. Retro, historically inspired design, steel butterfly clasp bracelet, Jubilee style center legs, full domed glass box crystal, not plastic, not quartz, fully mechanical, and every bit as real a watch as an Omega. The Tag Heuer Monaco, which was revitalized this year, in a lot of ways similar to the Carrera. Great movement, largely the same price, but more importantly, a heritage iconic design that has been a mainstay of their catalog for decades. It's not a mainstream design, it's square, it speaks to nerds, to racing enthusiasts, and not the generic watch consumer. Those 3 watches are an excellent summation of the offerings that Tag have. Solid, well-built watches with specs that will rival anything from Breitling, IWC, or Tudor. They're not lifestyle watches, they're not fashion watches. These are serious watches with everything a person could want from a real watch. And yes, they still have quartz watches like the Formula One Solargraph models for just under $2,000. But for those, first, I'd argue that it's not unusual for a brand to have a lower cost quartz offering. Longines do too, Cartier do too, both of which are regarded as serious watch brands. Second, what the watch world needs is some high-end brands offering an entry taste to new customers. Not everybody should be expected to pony up 10 grand for their first watch. So what's not to like about a $1,800 Solargraph quartz watch in fun colors? What you're left with is some random emotional reaction to a merger that happened 40 years ago. How about we just let it go and move on? So my verdict is they don't necessarily deserve a special bashing. They're good and they have real watches aplenty in their catalog. Whenever I go to Invicta's website or go near a display case with their watches, I know I need to take some sort of depressant so as to not get overly stimulated. Invicta watches are criticized for a lot of reasons, but above all else, it's because some of their watches are objectively hideous. They have watches where Ben 10 was like, I'm out, dude, that's just too much. They have watches so ugly that time runs backwards to get away from them. But you can get a pro diver for $100. Any brand in the sub $500 space, be that San Martin, Addies Dive, Swatch, or Invicta, are not in the game of having a cohesive collection with a simple, refined catalog for a target demographic. This is a brand that is about options at a low cost. You don't get an in-house mechanical movement. You might get mechanical sometimes. You don't get Fume, Grand Feu, hand enameled dials, but you get options, and more options. When you're also targeting younger people and you want to cover every base and aren't trying to be Daniel Wellington, Movado, or Armani boring in terms of design language, well, you go for Casio G-Shock styles on steroids. And you have a couple of watches that look a little bit homage-y. This is H&M. This is the variety space. There's no pretense. There's no attempt to be anything that they're not. And in this space, having everything on a permanent discount works as a sales ploy. So if you don't have a ton of money, you can get a nice looking watch that will get the job done. And if you want some silly options or a watch that has the logo of your favorite superhero or sports team on the dial, you can get that too. The verdict, stop being a snob. Invicta has its place. Breguet aren't so much hated as they are met with disappointment. Apparently, a lot of watch enthusiasts were secretly born in 1518 in the village of Glenfinnan on the shores of Loch Shiel, and you are immortal. You also met with the Breguet dude, and you really wish Louis XIV were still in power and Breguet weren't a shadow of their former selves. Talking about Breguet also gives you the opportunity to use the word languishing, because in your view, Breguet has been languishing under the Swatch Group ownership, a shadow of its former self that only needs a tech bro millionaire to buy it and restore Breguet to their rightful place among the most esteemed watch brands in the world. To you, I say, Breguet Type 20, 7225 with 10 Hz magnetic escapement, Breguet Souscrachon, and finally, the Breguet Experimental. In the last 6 months, maybe a year, Breguet have released some bangers that weren't Roman numeral Clou de Paris fuddy-duddy old fart watches. These are watches that technically and artistically rival any Patek or Journe. The Experimentale is a watch that could easily compete with any R&D Audemars Piguet model. The 7225 is an astonishing feat of watch engineering, and the Type 20 is a brilliant high-end pilot's chrono. So what are we really complaining about? That rich people like Mark Zuckerberg and Saudi Arabian princes don't buy them, but buy Richard Mille instead? Are we complaining that they're not, in some arbitrary fashion, cool like FP Journe? Are we complaining that their lead designer doesn't have the name brand recognition like Kari Voutilainen, Recep Recepi, or François Journe? Or are we complaining that they don't get hyped enough by rep manufacturers on TikTok? What exactly is the complaint? I do think there's an argument to be made that some of us just dislike on Breguet because it's the thing you do. Swatch Group is easy to take pot shots at, and Breguet are not cool. But right now, there are enough watches that people with just a modicum of watchmaking understanding should really admire and desire. My verdict? Breguet is great. Don't necessarily know if they're making money, but the watches, right now, pretty damn cool. Last one, Rolex. Yes, Rolex. Because I do believe for every Rolex lover there is out there, and there are a lot of those, 1.2 million people buy them every year, there are likely just as many that hate them. Rolex, how do we hate thee? Let us count the ways, and let's just do the rebuttal at the same time. Rolex is an overpriced, mass-produced product. Correct? They are mass-produced, but they're not overpriced. It's the only brand where a large portion of its watches don't really lose any value whatsoever, at least in steel. That's just facts. And yes, they are mass-produced, but mass-produced does not mean cheap, inexpensive, or low quality. Any person that actually knows something about watch manufacturing, so not the trolls that spend more time making negative comments under YouTube videos, the people in the know will state that no mass producer comes anywhere near Rolex's quality standards for the things that they offer. They're just that good. Rolex is boring. No, they're not. They are restrained. They are not trying to be Invicta. They're not trying to be Hublot. They are your classic two-piece navy suit. There's a reason a two-piece navy suit works. It's a great color that works on any person, and with the right tailoring, it makes you look good. It's not esoteric, it's not daring, but pretty much any Rolex is perfectly suited as an everyday watch. Rolex never innovate. Again, not true. Sure, their core designs don't change a lot, but the fact is, that's what their customers want. They don't want crazy, they want refinement. And when it comes to technology, Rolex has more patents than probably any other watch manufacturer in the world. Are they necessarily bleeding edge? No, they're like Apple. They let everybody else launch a product, and when everybody else has ironed out the kinks and flaws and child sicknesses, that's when Rolex enters the game with something that works right out of the gate. They restrict supply. Well, yes and no. Here's a simple fact. The best run company should ideally be able to sell all their stock and not one watch more. The best run luxury company should also ideally sell all their stock and have a queue of people that would like to buy one. The reason Omega can be had at a discount is because they produce too many watches. The reason Tudor sells at a discount on the grey market is because they make too many watches. The reason Breitling sells at a discount is because they make too many watches. You would love that Rolex was easily available, but the fact is, as a luxury watchmaker, that would be bad for business. Right now, pretty much anything in gold or two-tone is available as a walk-in at the Rolex ADs I frequent. Datejusts and Oyster Perpetuals too are relatively easy to get, but subs, Daytonas, GMTs, there's a waiting list. It's not as long as it has been, but it's still there, and that's good business. Verdict? Rolex make good watches and they run an excellent business and generally do very well with managing supply. They are supposed to be hard to get, and this will never change if Rolex themselves have anything to say about it. And the new Yachtmaster 2 is a lot better than the old Yachtmaster 2. There, I'm spent. Being positive about Hublot was positively draining. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you appreciated the alternative perspective on these brands. Share in the comments brands that get hate that you don't think deserve it. Like, subscribe. Cheers.